Hello students, welcome to Chapter 17, Lesson 3. It is called Life During the Civil War. So a little break from battles. We're going to go take a look specifically at things like hospital care at the time, prisons, the roles of women, and the hardships at home. So this lesson is a little dark, as you may well imagine. Life in a time period when the country was at war with itself kind of sucked. There were hardships, not just for the soldiers who fought, but their loved ones back home. We do talk about the roles of women in the Civil War, and they had some pretty cool contributions. They certainly made a good showing of themselves. So let's get into it. So, a war as all-encompassing as the Civil War touched everyone. Husbands and sons were often gone fighting. Wives and children had to carry on without them. Oftentimes, kids didn't go to school because they had to stay home to work to support the family with, dad and big brother gone. Churches, once home to the soothing hymns of a church service, were now filled with the groans of the sick and dying soldiers wounded in battle. The hardships in the South were more prominent than in the North. See, most of the fighting was done in the South. That meant that Southern property was being destroyed by the fighting and the marching. The South also had higher desertion rates. The fighting was there, so it was the Southerners that worked close to home, and it was easier for them to desert. Women had to struggle to make it work while the war raged. The war used up so much of the materials in the South, and the South, remember, relied on imports mostly for a lot of their goods. So with the blockade and being at war with the North, that meant that goods that they were used to having, they just didn't have anymore, and they just had to go on without it. With men gone in the North and South, women maintained the homes, did the labor on farms, and manned the factories. They started new roles as well. Thousands of women on both sides ended up serving as nurses, sometimes to the objections of the male doctors that thought they were too delicate to deal with essentially the horrors of a battlefield hospital. Our old friend Dorothea Dix persuaded officials to let women be nurses. She became the superintendent of nurses in the Union and recruited many women for the job. Clara Barton, and there's a link there if you'd like to learn more, is one famous Union nurse that went on to create the American Red Cross, an organization that to this day provides humanitarian aid. They do things like disaster relief and blood donations and stuff like that. There's Clara Barton right there. Now, a famous nurse in the Confederacy was Sally Tompkins. Miss Tompkins held the rank of captain and was the only female officer in the entire Confederacy. Now, women also had some more clandestine roles. Link there to definition if you don't know what clandestine is. So they had some clandestine roles to play in the war as well. The Union and Confederacy had lady spies that would pass on information to their respective side. For example, Rose O'Neal Greenhow was a Washington socialite. She was sort of like an upper-class lady that went to dinners and stuff like that and saw plays. So she was a Washington socialite with a wide circle of friends. She hobnobbed with senators, generals, and folk like that, and then learned what she could and sent that information to the Confederacy. It said that Confederate forces owe a good deal of their victory at the First Battle of Bull Run to information passed on by this Rose O'Neal. She later drowned in a boat trying to escape from a Union gunboat. You can read about it. I'll link it in. The Union had some spies as well. We've talked about Harriet Tubman. She worked as a scout for the Union. She would disguise herself as an old woman and go through Confederate towns and scope out defenses for the Union so they'd know what they were fighting against. The thing about that is that in the South, slaves built the fortifications, so she would dress up like an old woman and they go talk with the slaves and no one would think anything about it, like an old woman slave talking to the other slaves, and she would ask them about how they constructed the defenses and things like that. Moving on to prisons. Initially, prisoners were just exchanged during the war. They weren't held for long periods of time, but that system broke down for a number of reasons, and massive POW camps, prisoner of war, were set up. Conditions in both Union and Confederate prison camps were horrid. You can't say that one was worse than the other, like they're the bad guys and their prisons stunk. No, it was bad for both sides. There was little food and basically no sanitation. They talk about how they would use the same water to go to the bathroom in than they would to cook, and it just was not a good situation. About 1/4 of any prison population in a prison camp would die of disease. You can watch this video about Civil War camps to learn a little bit more. Now, field hospitals. There's a whopping 2 paragraphs on field hospitals in your textbook, so I embedded a video with more information. In a nutshell, they were dirty, nasty places filled with the dead and dying, with nurses and doctors doing their very best to save lives. There were a lot of amputations in the Civil War. Disease and infection was a big problem. Some units lost half their men not to death on the battlefield, but just to disease. Alright, moving a little lighter. In the South, there were many that did not support the war. Just like in the North, there are those that didn't support the war. But in the South in particular, everyday items and food were in short supply, as we mentioned. And there were bread riots in the cities as starving folks just started stealing food, breaking windows and stealing food. In the North, remember how we were talking about the Democratic Party splitting? Well, there were still Democrats in the North, but they kind of split again. There were peace Democrats and war Democrats. War Democrats supported the war, but didn't like the way Lincoln was running it. He was a Republican. They're Democrats. You get it. Peace Democrats wanted an immediate cease to hostilities and wanted the Union reformed through negotiation, not war. These peace Democrats were often from like the Midwest, places like Indiana and Ohio, and they were called Copperheads by the people that didn't like them. Poisonous snake, Copperheads. In both the North and the South, President Lincoln and President Jefferson Davis suspended what is called habeas corpus, which is funny Latin legal jargon saying that the government needs to have a reason to put you in jail. They can't just jail you for no reason. Well, they suspended habeas corpus. So basically that meant that they could put people in jail without a trial because maybe they said something that they didn't like. So really not very like First Amendment-y, not very American. But it was a power given to the president in times of, say, civil war, an emergency. So that's what they did. A lot of people, if you spoke out too fervently against the war and you were accused of being a traitor, Lincoln in the North or Davis in the South would put you in prison without trial. That's the suspension of habeas corpus. Alright, on the draft, real quick, we're doing good on time. As the war progressed, the need for soldiers increased, and drafts were passed in both the North and the South. The draft is best described as being called in the military, as in forced to join. Initially, enlistment bonuses was enough to get volunteers to sign up. But as time went on, and probably people learned about how terrible everything was, they didn't want to enlist anymore, so the drafts had to be passed, basically conscripting parts of the population. Initially, the draft was, say, a draft for men of able-bodied men between, say, 18 and 35 to join, relatively young men. But as the desperation and need for men increased, it kept getting wider and wider. For example, by the end of the Confederacy, they were drafting men as old as 50. That's, pretty old to go away and do war. There were certain exceptions for the draft. For example, you could pay a substitute to serve for you. A fine, or in the South, if you owned a certain amount of slaves, you were exempt from the draft. Like it was like if you were from a plantation and owns 20 more slaves, you don't have to go fight. Normal folk didn't like that because they couldn't afford those options or slaves, so they got pretty upset about that. People complained on both sides that the Civil War was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. Some folks were so angry about the draft that they rioted, as such was the case in the New York draft riots of 1863, somewhat famous historical event. Some were angry about the draft itself, and some weren't pleased with the Emancipation Proclamation. For example, those factory laborers thought that all these freed African Americans would come and take their jobs. You had other problems like shortages and inflation causing food to become too expensive. people were upset about the draft, and they rioted, and they burned down the draft office, government buildings, and the affluent and African Americans were attacked and often killed. The riot went on for 4 days before Union troops straight from Gettysburg came and broke them up. Over 100 people died. Over 100 people were killed. Alright, ending on the economy. Oh, and I have a cool video here if you want to learn more about the draft riots. War is expensive, so both the North and the South ended up suffering. But the South much more so. As we said, they were blockaded and they didn't have a lot of industry. Both sides paid for the war with loans from other governments, new taxes, including income taxes, which is taxes right on your paycheck. Northern industry actually profited because they were selling goods to the Union, to the Union Army. You had to build a lot of guns and uniforms and stuff like that. And farmers had someone to sell all their food to. All those soldiers needed fed. In the South, however, things were much worse because, like I said, they didn't have any industry, and the food riots were breaking out in the South by 1862. The cost of goods in both the North and the South went up, even more so in the South. So that caused inflation, which means your money could buy less. Your money became more worthless. But this was a really big problem in the South. In the North, they printed more money. They were called greenbacks. You can see why with the little picture down there. Alright, your assignment's a little different today. Different in that I'm giving you an option of which question you want to answer. So just pick one. See, it says option 1, option 2. You don't have to do both. You can pick whichever one you want. So please answer one of the following questions with complete sentences. How did the roles of women change during the Civil War? Alright, so you talk about nurses, spies, and stuff like that. Or option 2, do you think it was right for habeas corpus to be suspended during the Civil War? So we said habeas corpus said the government could put you in jail for saying something they didn't like and you didn't get a trial and things like that. So this is sort of a First Amendment issue. So it's your choice on which one you want to answer. Give me a couple sentences and we'll be good. Alright, that's it for lesson 3. Tomorrow we go back to more specific battles in a linear fashion. It's called The Strain of War. We talk about Fredericksburg, problems with Union leadership, the tide turning, some important battles. Gettysburg is there, Vicksburg, and we talk about the 54th Massachusetts, perhaps the most famous African-American regiment of the Union Army. Alright, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a good one.